During today's program, we'll be providing updates on the efforts to create an additional pathway to CPA licensure here in New Jersey and across the country. And we'll talk about other initiatives to promote the profession to students. So let's get started. We'll start with introductions. So first, to my immediate left is AJ Johnson, the CEO and Executive Director of the NJCPA. And to my far left is Jeff Kazerman, who of course is our Vice President of Government Relations. And in a few minutes, we'll be joined virtually by Marcus Rayner, Managing Director of U.S. Public Policy at PwC. All right, so we've done this before. I think we were in chairs last time, we weren't at the desk. But at that time, we were talking about the 150 rule. We're going to be talking more about that later in the webcast. But one of the reasons that we've been talking about this so much for the last 2 years is because it is just so important. It's more than just trying to put more CPAs into the pipeline. It's a workforce issue, it's a business issue, it's an economic issue, and so forth. And the good thing is we are going to be talking about a lot of progress that the profession has made in the last couple of years. But let's set the table. Let's go back sort of to the beginning. And Jeff, I know you have a lot of stats that you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, so like Don was saying, there has been a sharp drop over the years, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years, right, Don? And it's been not just here in New Jersey, it's been nationally, every other state also. So there's many reasons for that, but I think 3 key ones are demographics. You have basically baby boomers are retiring. There are not enough young people going to college in general to replace them, even if they were all same percentage were becoming CPAs as 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And there's less people of those remaining in the pool who are actually majoring in accounting. So those are what I would call demographic factors. So let me just give you some statistics. So the AICPA reports that approximately 75% of today's CPAs are expected to retire within the next 15 years. Here in New Jersey, what we're seeing is about a quarter of all of our members are already are beyond retirement age, and 31% of members are projected to reach retirement age in the next 15 years. At the same time, and this is dramatic, I think there's been a 25% decrease in the number of students graduating with an accounting degree in the past 5 years here in New Jersey. You know, according to the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, the number of high school graduates will peak this year at between 3.8 to 3.9 million, and then begin a gradual descent that will result in 13% fewer graduates by 2041, and in the Northeast, a 17% drop. So that's sort of the framework of or the bottom line where the profession stands, and we'll get into this more, but I'd say over the last 2 years, one of the biggest responses and very important to addressing this is offering additional pathways to get your license that fundamentally at bottom, one of the most important, and these all take legal changes, legislative changes, is allowing another option other than the 150. But we'll get into that more later. And so one of the problems with the decrease in CPAs is that there aren't enough to help to assist really all sectors, private industry, public companies, government, and individuals. So there's quite a demand and not enough CPAs. Yeah.
So as you said earlier, there's that issue of if it doesn't just affect public accounting firms, but if there's more demand for CPAs, and we're going to continue to see this as more legislation and regulation comes through, not just the federal level, but also state level, consumers, business people, they all tend to turn to their CPA when some new piece of legislation comes about. So, I mean, there's a big impact on CPAs from that perspective. So if there's a shortage, the businesses that are going to suffer are probably going to be in underrepresented areas. They're probably going to be smaller businesses. So those are the ones that are going to suffer, right? So it's another issue why this is a workforce development issue and not just
right.
about-
It'll also hit, middle, big businesses. And there's been articles in all the big, Wall Street Journal and so on about how it's tough to get auditors.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Nonprofits, that's another area
Yeah.
where there's a lot of suffering, because if you don't have the staff to do the work, obviously you have to scale back. You might raise prices, and then some of those clients are going to fall off. So AJ, we surveyed our members a little over a year ago because we wanted to get their feedback on things like the 120, 150. So what did our members tell us last year?
Last year, we asked our members to weigh in on the 150-hour requirement, and 40% of the 1,060 members surveyed said new hires working in accounting-related roles and without 150 hours of education rarely or never pursue the CPA certification. And 62% of the respondents said they see no noticeable difference in preparedness of staff who have accounting degrees with 120 credit hours versus those who have 150 credit hours. And then last but definitely not least, nearly 80% believe it would be beneficial to the profession to provide additional pathways to certification, where 150 hours is one option, but not the only option. And so we'll talk about that later in some detail. And the one thing to keep in mind is that our members told us, along with other state societies, that CPAs don't want to jeopardize their ability to serve clients and provide services across state lines without getting licensed in each jurisdiction. And in considering changes to the 150 requirement, 89% of respondents said that it's very important or somewhat important to protect CPA mobility. And we'll talk about mobility a little bit later in the broadcast.
So let's talk about some of the stats that Jeff alluded to, as well as you, AJ. Well, let's give one good stat, because a lot of the things that Jeff was saying are bad.
Mm-hmm.
One
That's
good stat.
typical.
Yeah. You're Debbie Downer. One stat that we heard, I think it was a couple of months ago, was that the number of accounting enrollments in colleges across the country has increased about 12%. So that's good news.
Positive.
But again, a good news, bad news situation. Jeff had alluded to the statistics on high school graduation. So I believe this year it's going to be the largest group of high school graduates in U.S. history.
Wow.
Unfortunately, after that, we hit what we've been talking a little bit about over the years, called the enrollment cliff, where colleges in the Northeast are expected to see about an 18% decline in college enrollment. So we have a little bit of an issue there. So that's one of the reasons that state societies like us and others across the country have been addressing a number of different issues related to the pipeline issue, and that includes image and barriers to entry and so forth. So AJ, why don't you talk a little bit about the pipeline task force that our board formed at the beginning of last year and what their three objectives are?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really been the foundation of our work. And then we'll talk more about some more things that we're looking at as our continued phase. But the pipeline task force focused on three areas. And one was to raise awareness of the profession among high school students and address negative perceptions among college students and recent grads. And that's to be able to tell a better story and obviously attract those students to accounting. The second priority is to remove obstacles to licensure and improve access to resources. And we'll get into more of that. And then third is to engage with and get buy-in from key professionals at firms, companies, and academia. And I just want to stop right here for a second to say that, we understand that there's not one single solution, just like we understand that if there's a shortage in accounting, that there's not just one segment that will be impacted. And so we've really looked at this from a multi-stakeholder approach, and how can we work with firms, companies, educators, and getting the word out to students to tell a better story.
Right. And I think, it's interesting. Before we even went live, we had a question from an attendee asking about the AICPA and state societies doing more to promote the brand of the CPA. So I think it's kind of interesting that's the first thing on the list, is to raise awareness among high school and college students. We're going to be talking a lot about removing obstacles. One data point that I wanted to mention, where sort of before the pipeline issue, a lot of the dialogue in the profession was about diversity, about trying to diversify the profession. And that actually led into the pipeline issue, because I think everyone realizes the profession needs to be more diverse in order to grow. But an interesting tie-in between those two things is that, and I'm citing one of Jeff's stats here, a 2023 study cited by the Wall Street Journal found that the 150 requirement causes a 26% drop in interest among minorities. So it's not only creating a shortage that hurts the public and business community, it also keeps low-income students out of well-paying, secure careers. So it's not just about kind of breaking down that barrier. Right. It's also about trying to bring more people into the profession. Yes. Right, exactly. And then the last thing, one of the reasons that we do a lot of these sessions is for that third bullet, engaging with and getting buy-in from professionals at firms, companies, and academia. You can't get buy-in unless they kind of they know the score, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. All right. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Marcus, who's going to provide us with a national update on legislation to create an additional pathway to CPA licensure. Marcus?
Thanks, Don, and happy to be here. As the state and local public policy lead for PwC, I'm tracking this with great interest on behalf of the firm, the Big Four, and large firms across the country. Against the backdrop of the data and the stories you guys just discussed, you may recall that about 2 or 3 years ago, the Minnesota CPA Society introduced legislation to create a bachelor's degree pathway in that state. And it sparked a broad and intense conversation in the profession about whether that was the appropriate way to go and whether the timing was right on that. And there was some opposition at the time from AICPA and NASBA to their proposal. And the reason Minnesota became kind of a canary in the coal mine on this and decided to take aggressive action early on is because in that state, the accounting shortage was so acute that the legislature had to change the test standards for county and municipal governments, because there weren't enough CPAs in Minnesota to service the local governments and get their needs met. And so it became quite a crisis in Minnesota, and they heard an outcry from their members of the CPA Society there to do something about it. And they acted and tried to move quickly. That sparked a national conversation. And what you saw over the last few years is AICPA created a national pipeline task force, which met over the course of about 8 months trying to address this issue, which looked at everything from the pathway to licensure, salaries, image of the profession, diversity, all of the challenges that Don and AJ and Jeff alluded to in the opening of this. But I think everyone began to recognize very quickly that the pathway was a challenge. I don't know about everyone on this call, but I probably hear anecdotes every day when I talk to our partners across the country of young people who see their friends go off into business and finance after 4 years of education and get that quick 5-year five-figure salary, while an accounting student forgoes that salary for a year and has to get 30 more hours of education. And you saw AJ's stat that many of the members of the CPA Society here in New Jersey did not see this 150 students as being particularly better suited to the job market when they came out. So I think we did have a problem in the profession, and the Pipeline Advisory Group came out with some recommendations to move forward. Those recommendations included moving to a competency model. NASBA had their own professional licensure task force, which met and proposed a competency framework. And so you had some competing ideas out there for how to improve the pipeline and get more CPAs interested in more candidates interested in the profession. And then last year, you may all know that AICPA and NASBA, which jointly control the Uniform Accountancy Act, which is the model legislation that states are encouraged to follow for their own Accountancy Act, came out with a exposure draft, I believe in September of last year, that went open for comments and included a bachelor's degree pathway with 2 years of experience that had to be based on a competency framework that was also put out with 8 core competencies that would have to be signed off on by a licensed CPA, and had what I would describe as a cumbersome process for preserving mobility. Just to pause for a second and say that as a representative of a large firm, our primary concern going into this was, of course, getting more CPAs in the profession, but our equally serious concern was preserving the practice mobility that the profession enjoys almost uniquely among licensed professions. That certainly serves regional and large national firms very well and serves the profession well. And we were concerned as a firm that the mobility language in the first UAA draft was not easily workable. And I think there was a lot of concern out there on the competency framework. And those were reflected in the comments, which closed in December and were made public early this year. And you saw AICPA and NASBA quickly feel the need to pivot on their UAA exposure draft. And that's why we have a second one now. And there was a lot of friction in getting there. I think NASBA was very wed at the time to its competency framework. Its board chair had been a big advocate for that. The professional task force that they founded had or organized had been a proponent of the competency framework, and AICPA was less wed to that. And so AICPA had a new president, as you all know, in January, who inherited this challenge of getting the profession on one page with licensure. And NASBA had a new board chair beginning, I guess, in October of last year. So you had new leadership that came together of both organizations in January and hammered out a new UAA exposure draft, which I think is getting a better reception. And comments for that are still open. I believe they're due May 6th. I could be off by a day or two on that, but they're due in the next week or so. That new UAA exposure draft has a bachelor's degree pathway alongside the current master's in 150 with 2 years of general experience, much like the 1 year that currently exists for 150 pathway. There's no need for competency framework. You just work for a licensed CPA. They certify that you work for them for 2 years and you've satisfied the experience requirement. And it throws out the term substantial equivalency, the new exposure draft, and also the idea of automobility, and comes up with a new term called individual practice privilege, which basically says that if you are a licensed CPA in a state that follows the UAA and you have passed the exam and have either a bachelor's and 2 years of experience or a 150 in 1 year, you enjoy practice mobility across state lines. And the last provision that was added to this new exposure draft is what we call a safe harbor provision, which basically says if you in the UAA draft, if you are a licensed CPA as of December 31st, 2024, you enjoy mobility, full stop. No question about when and whether you pass the exam, which of course you would have, and what your pathway was. You have a license as of December 31st, 2024, you enjoy mobility going forward. And that's to preserve the current status quo for all of the people who are currently licensed as CPAs across the country. So although Minnesota led the fight, a lot of states have picked up the baton and moved forward. And I think this new exposure draft that has been now voted on for exposure by both the boards of NASBA and AICPA have given states permission to move forward with a new consensus in the profession. And you're seeing bills pass very quickly across the states. 6 states have already enacted this new pathway into law. Those states are Ohio, Virginia, Utah, New Mexico, Indiana, and Hawaii. Notably, Hawaii is requiring 3 years of experience for a bachelor's pathway because Hawaii likes to be different. The legislation has already passed both houses in several more states: Georgia, Montana, Tennessee, Maryland, Iowa, and soon Texas. And it's passed one house in Florida, Illinois, South Carolina, Alaska, and Oregon, North Carolina. I think that's it. And there are a lot more legislatures. You know, I always like to say legislatures are procrastinators. They like to pass most of their legislation in the final weeks and months of their session. And so most states will resolve their legislative sessions by June. So you'll see a lot of bills get done in June, and a few like New Jersey and Massachusetts go until the end of the year. And so I think whether New Jersey does this quickly or by the end of the year, I think it'll get done this year. But I can confidently say, I think by the end of this calendar year, at least 15 to 20 states will have changed their licensure law to create a bachelor's degree pathway. And next year, I think another 20 states will do so. And just this year, I think you'll see that those states will include California, Texas, Illinois, probably Florida, certainly Georgia and Tennessee, and hopefully New Jersey, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. New York is a different animal, and we're hoping that New York will act this year, but there's no guarantee of that. But I think some very significant states will do it, and that will create kind of an inertia for the rest of the country. And there'll be a couple of outliers, just to say that, like Wyoming, for example, only has a budget session in 2026, so you can't move policy legislation in 2026. Wyoming won't get this done until 2027. There'll be a few states like that. So we have a couple of years before we get all 50 states to get it done. But like I said, this new UAA draft has really given the states permission to move forward with this bachelor's degree pathway. And I think we'll see pretty much uniformity across the states within 2 to 3 years. And that will give the profession some confidence moving forward on how we train and what we expect of our new professionals, and hopefully bring new people into the profession.
Great. Marcus, there has been, AJ mentioned our statistic from last year, 80% of our members want an additional pathway to licensure, but that means 20% maybe don't necessarily think it's a good idea. We have seen some pushback from CPAs who think that going back to the old rules, so to speak, is lowering the bar for the profession. How have the states that have passed legislation, or how have you been addressing that concern?
Well, I think, that is a concern that a number of people hear. I think the answer to that, quite frankly, is that this is an apprenticeship profession, right? And the experience is at least as valuable, if not more so, than those 30 hours, especially given the odd historic reality that those 30 hours were not defined. So while you did have master's candidates that had specialization in business and accounting, you had a lot of students who got a concentration in accounting as a bachelor's degree, decided to pursue their license, and took courses completely unrelated to the work they were going to do. So for whatever historical reason that occurred, and I understand it was a legislative compromise far before I joined PwC and in my current career, I think that was really the kind of chink in the armor of 150, is that it did have those hollow 130. And so I think you can make a very strong argument that, given that most of the licensed CPAs today, and I would say the vast majority of partners at my firm, are 120 and 2 people from 25 years ago when they got licensed and are doing very well and serving the profession well, that the experience is at least as valuable. And I think you just, you make sure that these people are getting the proper experience under a licensed professional CPA, and they're learning as an apprentice, essentially, as the profession has always been.
Right, exactly. And I think it's also important to note that in New Jersey, with the proposed legislation, and in other states, the 150 is not going away. This is an additional pathway. Someone can still pursue a master's. They can still pursue the work for credit programs, which have been very successful the last couple of years. I think that's an important point.
I agree. And the pushback we are seeing across the country really comes from the academics, who are concerned, having created MAC programs at the request of the profession, that those are now in jeopardy. And I think time will tell what that means for the master's programs. I think there is a role and a reason we're keeping the 150. I think there are students who will want to get a master's and are prepared to do that, and will want that pathway because it will help them stand out in the marketplace. But I understand the concerns from colleges and universities. The hope here is that by evolving the CPA licensure model, you'll attract more candidates, and these schools will get more bachelor's candidates in their accounting program at the possible expense of a few master's candidates. But really, if they see an uptick in people choosing to pursue accounting, hopefully that will allay those concerns over time.
Marcus, one last question. We tend to be fairly humble here at the NJCPA, and I think most state CPA societies don't usually toot their own horn. But is it a fair statement to say that this legislation, not just ours in New Jersey, but across the country, these additional pathways would not have happened without the support from state CPA societies?
Oh, 100%. I think CPA societies really led in this area, and there's a lot of reasons for that. They're responding to their members, as I alluded to in Minnesota, as CPA societies do, and it's obviously very important. And they're closer to their members than, even though AICPA and NASBA are great organizations that try to listen to their members, the state CPA societies are closer to their members than those national organizations. And I think that's why you saw the states leading in this area, and AICPA and NASBA, frankly, had to catch up, and I'm glad they did.
Marcus, thank you very much. That was great information. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That was brave of me to ask Marcus that question, because I actually hadn't teed him up in advance. So I was pretty sure he was going to answer that way, but you just never know. So now we're going to talk about some specific initiatives that the NJCPA is pursuing. Let's start with the draft legislation that Marcus alluded to, which will provide an additional pathway to licensure, which is expected to be introduced in New Jersey, in the New Jersey legislature on May 5th. So AJ, why don't you give a little bit of detail of what's included in the bill?
Absolutely. And I just want to thank Marcus again for sharing the details, because what we have in our bill is definitely in alignment with what he talked about just a minute ago. So with the additional licensure pathway option in New Jersey, candidates will be able to pursue a CPA license by earning a bachelor's degree and completing 2 years of experience and passing the CPA exam. The current option would remain available as well, so that's important. So 150 credits, 1 year of experience, and passage of the CPA exam. In addition, what we spoke about earlier, mobility, that's the individual practice privileges. CPAs licensed in another state will be able to practice in New Jersey as long as they have a bachelor's or higher degree, have passed the CPA exam, and have at least 1 year of experience as a licensed CPA. And those same requirements will be necessary for gaining a reciprocal license in New Jersey. We also have a safe harbor provision in our bill where CPAs licensed in New Jersey prior to the effective date of the bill will automatically retain their license. So no worries there. And the effective date would be January 1 of 26.
Okay, before we move to Jeff to talk about sort of the mechanics of how the legislation will move through the legislature, a couple of questions have come in. One alluded to sort of work study programs. I'm going to maybe borrow that question a little bit to make the point again about the work for credit programs,
Yes.
which were launched a couple of years ago. I think have been very successful for schools like Seton Hall, Ryder, and others. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so those programs, they will still be available.
Right.
You know, so New Jersey is unique in the sense that the state took the lead to complement the bachelor's degree with the 30 hours being experience-based, and to identify those milestones with the university in conjunction. So that way, the participants in the programs are ensured an opportunity to gain exposure to firm culture, get the appropriate experiences in order to gain the 30 hours of credit. And I think that that's so important when you look at the overall landscape and the, you know, every day we're hearing of states adding an additional pathway. This is to just make sure that wherever a student thinks that they can fit in, that there are various ways to do it without lowering the bar and ensuring that that experience is positive, it's meaningful. And if you do decide to get the master's, that it's focused, you know, and we're moving away from those 30 hours that really haven't been specified, you know, in analytics or business.
And Marcus is 100% correct that Minnesota was the first to kind of venture down that path of a year of experience replacing the 30 credits. But I think the Work for Credit program really demonstrated that apprenticeship idea that Marcus alluded to, that it could be meaningful, that it could provide value to firms and to the students, or that they were actually graduates. So I think that's a model that hopefully will stick around, because I think it's got a lot of value to it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would just add to that the Work for Credit program, which was the first step in this direction nationally, even before Minnesota, is essentially an ingenious workaround when there was not enough support nationally to do a 120 credit option. It's really the same thing for those 30 credits for that year. Once you graduate and you work for a year or whatever it is for a firm, you're getting credits for it.
Right.
And that's took no state intervention or whatever. That just took an agreement with the schools and the employers that we will give you credits for this. but it's essentially the same as the extra year of experience. So I think New Jersey was ingenious in coming up with that. I can't take the credit for that program. It came out of the Board of Accountancy. And so, yeah, that program still exists. And basically, it's another way of doing the 2 years of experience.
Right. And let's give credit where credit's due. You mentioned the State Board of Accountancy. They didn't necessarily create something new, but I think they pushed this idea of work for credit. Dan Geltrude was the torchbearer for that. And then also kudos to St. Peter's and PwC for being the first two participants in that. So another question that came in that I think will transition right into the legislation, Jeff, is what do the changes, meaning the alternative pathway, what does it mean for current accounting majors attending college? Do we know that yet? We might not know that yet.
I don't think we know that yet.
Okay.
That will be determined by regulations that the Board of Accountancy has to adopt after this bill is enacted, which we all think will happen.
So I skipped a step. So let's talk about the legislation.
Okay,
and how
yeah,
that process is going to work.
yeah,
Like I said, I skipped a step.
You went off
Forgive me.
script again.
I did, yes.
So putting that aside and what happens, with regulations, because the way the process works is a bill is passed into law, and there's not enough in the statute to cover every single little practical implication of a law, especially a licensing law. So then the next step is there are a lot of places in the law where it'll say what these educational requirements will be is up to the Board of Accountancy and other things like that, and when the due dates are and so on and so forth. So, but looking at the step one, getting a bill passed, it's very straightforward, just looking at it as far as the process, which is basically a bill is introduced, it then has to pass two houses and then be sent to the governor for his or her signature. And the process through the legislature it's got to be heard in one house is in a committee, then be voted on and passed by the full house. Then usually it goes to the other house and the same thing happens. And then the governor has, anywhere between 40, in effect, de facto really has between right away up until 3 or 4 months later to sign it. The reality, though, or what happens is much more complicated. This is not like the business world. There's no set agenda for legislative meetings that kind of, fly by their pants. Is that the
seat of their pants?
Seat of their pants.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Well, that wasn't in the script yet.
Yes.
So you never know. As an example, May 5th was supposed to be a committee meeting at which this bill, our bill, would be voted on. But at the last minute, it's been canceled. So, and we'll get into this more later, I think. But, so the next expected date is May 15th for the committee to be heard. But and I'm making this up. I have no reason to believe that this is going to happen. Let's say some emergency happened. The legislature could say, well, you know what? We're not having committee meetings on the 15th, and instead we're calling into session the full legislature to consider this emergency. So that is one of the problems, scheduling. And scheduling is not only a matter of when are they meeting, scheduling is also a problem in the sense that there are so many bills out there that so many groups want posted for a vote, and you can't put every bill up. So there's the behind the scenes of put my bill up, not their bill. Then typically, not with this bill, there's all kinds of opposition. So anyway, and every step of this process can be like that. I don't expect there to be any contention, any groups opposed. I think there'll be a lot of groups in support, business groups in particular. The only thing I think that could possibly slow it down is inertia and the problem with, there's all these other issues. But I don't think we have some very good sponsors. We're well regarded in the legislature. We don't ask for stuff all the time. So I don't think that'll be a problem. So, right. But this is the process, very simple on paper.
Very Schoolhouse Rock.
Yes.
About how to pass it.
Yes, but it's more like sausage making on the inside.
Right. Yes. Now, I know you and AJ have had many conversations with lawmakers about the CPA shortage, and you said about a minute ago you're not envisioning any pushback on the concept of the bill. It could be
Right.
pushback because it just gets pushed to the side for more important issues or
Right.
issues viewed more important by the lawmakers. But in the event that there should be some obstacle in our way, there are a couple of ways we're asking everyone watching today and all of our members to help get this legislation passed. So Jeff, you want to start with that?
Yeah, sure. Well, even if there's no opposition, which again, I don't think there will be, at targeted times, we will probably ask our members to reach out, preferably by phone. Actually, the most preferable way is by the old-fashioned handwritten letter. But if not that, by phone, and the least favorable but still effective is email. We will still be reaching out to our members with alerts, and a very simple way of doing that. Even if there's no opposition, at certain key points, just when the legislators see these letters, they pay attention to, believe it or not, nobody believes it, but they're almost too sensitive to the mail they get. And that will just be part of publicizing this issue. They'll see it. But let's just say, and don't expect this, but if there was opposition in the whatever committee, some group popped up and they're lobbying lawmakers to stop, the passage of this bill, then we would want to activate our members who live in the districts of those people on the committee and reach out and tell them, hey, you should vote for this bill. I live in your district and here's why. And I'm telling you, again, many people think like, well, they don't care what people think, but they care about, maybe they don't in general, but they sure do care about people who live in their district and can vote for them. I can tell you that, let's say 8 of our members called and said, no, you should support this bill. And 0 or 1 of the other folks from the other group said the same thing from their side, you should not support this. It would be considered overwhelming support in your district. So when you get these emails, and this is the only issue from us, we make it very easy. You just click onto this link, and then you put in your name, and letters usually already written for you. It's very important to do it. It's easy, and it does have an impact. And I can tell you, I've seen us pass bills over the years that were contentious, and we only got it done because of this.
Right. And as Jeff said, should it come to that, should it come to a grassroots campaign, we pretty much take care of everything for members. We'll send you the email template. We'll send you where you can find out if you don't know who your lawmaker is, you can look that up. And then basically you just have to, hit a couple of different links and boom, you're done. So we will make it incredibly easy. Now, in addition to the way Jeff described, members can engage with lawmakers, there's another way that members can engage with lawmakers, and that's through the NJCPA Political Action Committee. So AJ, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So in addition to that online advocacy portal, it is vital to support the NJCPA Political Action Committee. It's a bipartisan organization that supports lawmakers, who supports issues important to CPAs and the accounting community. And we need all of you to contribute. Other professional groups raise much more money than we do. And I'll give you an example. Our PAC average, the contributions on average is about $4 per member, while dentists average $54 per member, and the trial lawyers averages around $175 per member. And that's important because, as Jeff said, the field is crowded when asking lawmakers to sponsor bills and push issues of importance. Obviously, we're not the only organization looking to push through bills of importance to the profession and to the public. And so I would encourage and ask everyone to contribute to the PAC. There's no required dollar amount, so smaller contributions are welcomed as well. And just to keep the PAC in mind, because this is an election year with 80 seats in the Assembly, as well as the governor's office, all up for grabs. So, it's important to consider the PAC and keeping it front and center so that the lawmakers are paying attention to our issues.
And you can see a link to the PAC on your screen right now. And just one very important thing to mention is that our PAC, we don't care whether the lawmaker has a D or an R after their name. If they are CPA friendly, business friendly, then we're going to work with them. We'll try and work with them.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'll just add one other thing to that is that this whole notion of like you are in some way buying a vote is completely wrong. The object of the PAC is to elect candidates who will be lawmakers who support your issues, which is legitimate to, that's part of the democratic process to help elect those who are favorable to your position. So we don't only give to one party, and we are not purchasing any votes. No PACs do. We're just helping to elect people who support us.
Yes.
Okay. Before we move on to the next topic, there's a couple of questions I wanted to jump on. Jeff, I guess this could be for you, and you don't necessarily have to have a definitive answer, but how long do you think it will take the state board to prepare and issue the detailed rules required so this legislation can be in force? The quotes are theirs.
Well, formally passing all the regulations, especially with the shortage of state workers, always takes a long time.
Right.
The regulatory process is even worse or harder than the legislative process because first the board itself has to agree on what they want. Once they do, they have to give it to the regulatory analysis and the Division of Consumer Affairs. They may make changes. Then it has to go to the Attorney General's office. Then it has to go to the Governor's office. So it can take forever. However, a year or two, it could take. On the other hand, when it's urgent, it could be less, half a year, 9 months. But the board, in many instances, can offer temporary rules.
Okay.
And I don't think that there's going to be, we haven't got the bill passed, so people haven't really thought about all the regulations and everything. But having the regulations drafted or doesn't stop the bill from moving if they're not. And I think the board will work out a way to do this.
And conceptually, we believe that the board supports the concept of 2 years of experience in lieu of the extra 30 credits, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
they are 1,000% behind it.
So that should grease the wheels a little bit.
Yes. They'll be doing everything they can to grease the wheels.
Yes. And one last question. I think this is a quick one. The experience requirement, is the requirement inclusive of public, private, government, et cetera? Yes.
Yes.
It's
That's
under
how
the
it's
supervision of a CPA, and you can get that requirement.
And it's meant to be that way, so that it's inclusive regardless of if you have your experience at a firm or a company. It's meant to capture all of that.
Right. And that's an important point too, because there is a shortage of CPAs, not just in public, but also in private. So we want to make sure those individuals who decide to go into private out of school, that they're able to become a CPA.
Absolutely.
So let's talk, we talked a little bit about the pipeline task force. We also formed another group called the Pipeline Advocacy Work Group. AJ, could you tell the audience a little bit about that?
Sure. So the Pipeline Advocacy Work Group consists of high school and college educators, and they have identified 8 phase 1 initiatives. And these initiatives include drafting the legislation for the alternative licensure pathway that we've been discussing, as well as STEM-related tasks and efforts to increase accounting education in New Jersey high schools and strengthening relationships with educators. So there's a lot of work being done, as I mentioned earlier. It's not just one single approach, but the work group understands this. The board, our task force, understands that. So we're taking a lot of different approaches to make sure that we can make positive impact over time.
Right. So Jeff, do you want to talk about some of the initiatives that have been completed or underway from the work group?
Sure. It's, the work group has a plan that we took quite a while putting together with more than 8 initiatives, but those are phase 1, very detailed plan. Obviously, one part of the plan was this alternative or additional pathway, which has taken up a lot of time for the group. A lot of folks, including us, did not expect this issue to come out so strong so soon, but it's well worth it. But other initiatives are, as AJ touched on, to get more accounting education in the K through 12 and the higher ed, through making more classes, let's say, available, maybe student loans on the college level. And a big piece of this is STEM, getting most people, including, I hate to admit it, myself prior to this, think that if accounting is going to be part of STEM, it will obviously falls under the math part, which really, let's face it, with computers and the math is not like high level mathematical whatever, but the technology end, or the programming and all the software and the data collecting that CPAs do now is really technology. And most people, again, including myself, don't think of accounting in that way, but it should be. And I guess this initiative started with the AICPA getting a bill introduced on a national level in Congress that would, in so many words, the de facto intent would be to get accounting recognized as far as getting grants, federal grants, as a STEM subject. Because everybody wants to be in STEM, everybody wants, and then the government gives you money, all kinds of things. And so they worked on that. There's been a little problem getting that through, but I will say that other topics, other professions, like, believe it or not, landscape architects are considered STEM.
Which one? Which letter?
What?
Which letter?
Technology? I don't know. So, and I think accounting is obviously, in my mind, a lot more appropriate for a STEM designation. So that's being worked on a federal level. Here in New Jersey, we're first of all trying to educate lawmakers, that accounting is really STEM on the technology end. Again, if you ask them and they don't even know if it's STEM, if they happen to know, they're like, oh, math. So that has been a real big thing we've been working on. And so we're also working directly with the executive branch, right, and the legislature.
And I can talk about what we're doing at NJCPA.
Yeah.
So we have career presentations at high schools, and this year 67 members have made presentations at 70 New Jersey high schools. We also have college campus participation, including 74 members who have made presentations or attended career fairs at New Jersey's colleges this school year, as well as accelerating scholars in accounting, which I'm very excited about. And that's for college accounting and business students. And we're holding the second annual program on May 16th, and more than 80 students are registered for that. And then we also have a great relationship with the Center for Audit Quality Accounting Plus program, and we've partnered with CAQ on programs at underrepresented high schools in New Jersey, as well as our relationship with Junior Achievement. We've done some school outreach, and we participate in JA's middle school programs throughout the state. So we're very proud of those activities.
Yeah, all those items that Jeff mentioned a couple of minutes ago, STEM or changing the curriculum or getting more money into the classrooms, obviously they take a while, right? They're going to take some time. So that's why it's so important to do these grassroots efforts to get into the classroom, have our members get into the classroom. But one of the things we also wanted you to talk about, Jeff, is that since this really is a workforce issue, we have solicited the support of other business groups. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So New Jersey Business and Industry Association, NJBIA, is probably the business group that's been most out front on workforce development. All the other business groups have also, it's become a real primary issue. I don't even think it made the list of the top 10 15 years ago, but it's definitely way up there now. And they worked with us on making that pipeline advocacy work group plan. And they have agreed to pretty much take what's in that plan, and as we roll it out, to help us with that and to make it part of their agenda. So, for example, they support this additional pathway bill, and they will testify in support of it. And we also hope to get other groups, business groups, the African American Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce, and on, to, officially support the bill, which will, again, I think the bill will move anyway, but that's good PR, public relations, and make them aware of it. So that's where, pretty much right now, other groups are working with us. And later on, once the bill is law, we'll have to work with colleges and employers to make them aware of this.
So AJ, you and I have talked about how the legislation is once it's passed, it's not the end.
Correct.
It might be the end of, let's call it phase one, but that means there's going to be a phase two, and that phase two will really start to look at the impact that the legislation has had. So we've looked at access, providing better access, providing opportunity, and now we believe this legislation or other efforts will provide impact. So what are some of the ways that members can get involved to educate students about the legislation, about the opportunities they can have in accounting, about the impact they can have as a CPA on businesses, individuals, and society at large, really?
That's a great question. I would say the big thing is to get out there and tell positive stories. Talk about your own impact and how you've been able to, I hear so many stories where it's not just about the profession, but personally, being able to impact your community. I think those types of stories really resonate with young people and the students. And we hear all the time, going out to schools that they want to do something that's impactful. And so I think it's important to share that narrative that you can do both. You can have lots of great professional experiences, but then you can help your family, you can help your community, you can be a part of a business with deep expertise, in any area of practice, and you can get industry expertise. So I was just talking to a student, and she's a great athlete, and she's going for her master's and to become a CPA, and she's already heard from one of the major NBA franchises because that's just, it's so attractive, right, to combine your experience as a young person and have that foundation in accounting.
Right. And when this whole issue came about a couple of years ago, I think the knee-jerk reaction was to say, well, we need to make accounting cool. But one of the things that we've talked a lot about is, talk about the positive stories, talk about the impact that you can have. And just coincidentally, I think it was last week, there was a Fortune magazine article, was titled Gen Z is Coming to the Rescue. And what the article talked about was Gen Zers are increasingly viewing accounting not as a monotonous chore, not that it ever was, but as a way to transform people's lives. And one of the students was quoted as saying, accounting is the science of the business world. So, that's the way we change the perception of accounting. Don't try and make it cool, but talk about the impact that you can have on people's lives. So AJ, I know you wanted to acknowledge some of our pipeline firm partners.
Yes, I would like to do that. Thank you. So our pipeline partners include Clifton Larson Allen, Cohn Resnick, Deloitte Foundation, Eisner Amper, EY, Forvis Mazars, Wilk and Gutton Plan, WIS, and Witham. Without them, this would not be possible.
Great. Yes, thank you very much. They are great at providing support for the organization, volunteers, you name it. So much thanks to them. So That wraps up today's broadcast. Many thanks to Marcus, AJ, and Jeff for their updates and insights.